What do you do when your own child turns on you, not with words, but with violence? Most people think old age is peaceful. They imagine quiet afternoons and gentle memories, but sometimes the ones you love most become the ones who hurt you the deepest. My name is David Anderson. I'm 83 years old, and last week my son hit me, right here in the house we built together. He looked at me with a stranger's eyes and said, "You don't deserve to rest." In that moment, everything I believed about family shattered. But what happened next, that was the real miracle. If you think you know how this story ends, I promise you don't. I'm sitting here on my old porch swing, the one Sarah, my late wife, and I picked out so many years ago. It still creaks the same way, a comforting, familiar sound in the quiet of this afternoon. The sun is warm on my face, and there's a gentle breeze rustling the leaves in the big oak tree at the edge of the yard. It's peaceful now. Terribly, wonderfully peaceful. But I'm not here to talk about the weather, much as an old man like me enjoys it. I'm here because it's time to talk about something I've kept locked away for too long. Something heavy. My son, David, he hit me, struck me, his own father, and all for a blasted television remote. Can you imagine? He told me I didn't deserve to rest. Those words, they cut deeper than his hand ever could. It's a hard thing to admit, a shameful thing, but it happened. And then, just when I thought there was nothing left but darkness, a miracle occurred. A genuine, honest-to-God miracle. It's a long story, and maybe not a pleasant one in parts, but I feel I need to tell it. Maybe it'll help someone else. Maybe it'll just help me, finally, to let it all out. If you're listening to me now, wherever you are, thank you. Thank you for giving an old man your time. If you feel like it, tell me in the comments where you're from. It'd be nice to know these words are reaching out, traveling beyond this old porch. And if you're inclined, a little like on this video, or a subscribe to the channel, well, it helps these stories get heard. They tell me. It helps me feel a bit less like I'm just talking to the wind. My life wasn't always like this. Before David, before the shadows crept into our home, there was light. So much light. I was born in 1940, just as the world was tearing itself apart. My own childhood wasn't a picnic, mind you. We lived in a small, cramped house on the poorer side of Oakhaven, a town that's probably not much different from 1,000 others. My father, he was a stern man, a man of few words and even fewer displays of affection. He worked at the mill long, hard hours and came home smelling of sweat and sawdust and often the bitter scent of cheap whiskey. My mother, bless her soul, was a worrier. She worried about money. She worried about my father's moods. She worried about me and my sister, Clara. The air in our house was often thick with unspoken tensions, a kind of greyness that seeped into everything. Children back then, well, we were meant to be seen and not heard, mostly. You didn't question. You didn't complain. You just endured. I remember vowing to myself, even as a boy, that if I ever had a family, it would be different. There would be laughter. There would be warmth. I met Sarah when I was 22. She was like a sudden burst of sunshine in my otherwise muted world. She worked at the bakery downtown, and I'd make excuses to go in just to see her smile, to hear her laugh. She had a kindness about her, a genuine sweetness that just drew you in. We married a year later, a simple ceremony, but our hearts were full. We found a little house, not much bigger than the one I grew up in, but it felt like a palace to us because it was ours. We filled it with hope, with dreams, and eventually with the sounds of our son, David. David, my boy. He was born on a crisp autumn morning, a healthy, screaming bundle of joy. Sarah and I, we were over the moon. Holding him in my arms for the first time, there's no feeling like it in the world. This tiny, perfect human being entrusted to us. I looked at his little scrunched-up face, his tiny fingers grasping mine, and I felt that old vow resurface, stronger than ever. My son would know love. He would know security. He would never ever feel the chill of neglect or the sting of a harsh, unthinking word that I had sometimes known. The early years were, well, they were everything we'd hoped for. David was a bright child, quick to laugh, full of energy. Sarah doted on him, perhaps a little too much, if I'm honest. Anything David wanted, David usually got. If he scraped his knee, it was a major catastrophe requiring endless comfort. If he threw a tantrum in the store because he couldn't have a certain toy, more often than not, Sarah would give in, just to keep the peace, just to see him smile again. I'd try to be the firmer hand sometimes. "Sarah, honey," I'd say gently, "he needs to learn he can't always have his way." And she'd look at me with those soft eyes of hers and say, "Oh, David, he's just a child. Let him be happy." And I suppose, in a way, I wanted him to be happy too, so desperately. Perhaps I too was compensating for my own less than joyful childhood. We gave him everything we could, materially, the best toys, the nicest clothes we could afford. We worked hard, Sarah taking on extra shifts at the bakery once David started school, me putting in overtime at the factory where I'd ended up. We wanted him to have advantages we never did, and for a while, it seemed fine. He did well in school, had friends. He was a handsome boy, charming when he wanted to be. But there were signs, little things at first, a certain possessiveness over his toys, even when friends came to play, a tendency to sulk if he wasn't the center of attention. When he was around 10 or 11, I remember an incident at a family picnic. His cousin, Michael, who was a couple of years younger, picked up David's new baseball bat. David snatched it back so forcefully that Michael stumbled and started to cry. Instead of apologizing, David just glared. "It's mine," he said, his voice hard. I took him aside, told him he needed to learn to share, to be kinder. He just looked down, muttered a sullen sorry that clearly wasn't heartfelt, and then avoided Michael for the rest of the day. Sarah smoothed it over, of course. "He's just protective of his things, David. Boys are like that." As he grew into his teens, this sense of entitlement seemed to crystallize. Chores were met with arguments or outright refusal. If we asked him to help around the house, it was as if we'd asked him to move mountains. His room was a disaster zone. But if we commented, he'd fly into a rage about us invading his privacy. Schoolwork started to suffer. His teachers would report that he was bright but lazy, easily distracted, sometimes disrespectful. We'd try to talk to him, to reason with him. Sarah would plead, I would try to be firm. Sometimes it would end in shouting matches. David storming off to his room, slamming the door so hard the walls would shake. Other times, he'd turn on the charm, apologize, promise to do better. And for a week or two, he would. Then, slowly, he'd slide back into his old ways. We worried? Oh, how we worried. Was it just typical teenage rebellion? Were we being too hard on him, too soft? We'd lie in bed at night, whispering our fears in the dark. "He'll grow out of it," Sarah would say, more to convince herself than me, I think. All boys go through this stage. But in my heart, a cold knot of dread was beginning to form. This felt different, deeper. He finished high school, just barely. He talked about college, but made no real effort to apply or to find a job. He just stayed. Lived in our house, ate our food, contributed nothing. He was an adult, legally, but in every other way, he was still a dependent, demanding child. The years started to blur. His 20s passed in a haze of part-time jobs he couldn't keep, late nights out with friends who seemed as aimless as he was, and long days spent lounging around the house, watching television or playing video games. The atmosphere in our home grew heavy, much like the one I'd known as a child, though for different reasons. It wasn't unspoken tension, not always. Often, it was spoken, loudly. David's demands became more insistent. He needed money for this, money for that. If we refused or even hesitated, he'd become sullen or angry, sometimes accusing us of not loving him, of wanting him to fail. He knew how to twist the knife, how to play on Sarah's guilt and my lingering hope that he'd somehow, someday, turn a corner. Sarah's health began to decline. The doctors said it was her heart, weakened by years of stress and, I suspect, by the constant, low-level anxiety of living with David. She tried to hide her pain, her fatigue, but I could see it in her eyes, in the way she moved more slowly, in the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. David seemed oblivious. Or perhaps he just didn't care. His needs, his wants, always came first. If Sarah asked him to run an errand because she wasn't feeling up to it, he'd often complain or make excuses. "I'm busy, Mom," he'd say, even if he was just sitting on the sofa, channel surfing. I remember one afternoon, Sarah was clearly unwell. She was pale, short of breath. I asked David if he could at least make her a cup of tea. He looked up from his phone, annoyed. "Can't you do it? I'm in the middle of something." I saw the flash of pain in Sarah's eyes before she quickly masked it. "It's all right, David," she whispered. "I can manage." I made the tea myself, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. How had my son, our beloved boy, become so callous, so utterly self-absorbed? My own internal world was a battlefield. The love I had for my son, the memories of that sweet little boy, warred constantly with the reality of the man he had become. I felt a crushing disappointment, a profound sadness. Had I failed him? Had Sarah and I, in our desire to give him everything, somehow robbed him of his ability to stand on his own feet, to be a decent human being? The guilt was a heavy cloak I wore every day. I tried talking to him, countless times, calmly, angrily, pleadingly. Sometimes he'd listen, nod, and even seem contrite, but nothing ever changed. Not for long. I didn't really have anyone to confide in. My sister, Clara, lived in another state, and we'd drifted apart over the years. My old friends from the factory, well, we'd meet for a beer now and then. But how do you tell them your son is breaking your heart, destroying your home? There's a shame to it, a feeling of personal failure that's hard to voice. So I kept it mostly bottled up, trying to shield Sarah from the worst of my anxieties, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Then Sarah got worse, much worse. It was sudden, a massive heart attack. One minute she was there, fussing over whether I'd taken my blood pressure medication. The next, she was gone, just like that. The light of my life, extinguished. The pain was indescribable. A gaping hole torn in the fabric of my world. "David," he cried at the funeral. He seemed genuinely grief-stricken for a while. But even in grief, his selfishness found a way to surface. He complained about the funeral arrangements, the cost. He made it about him. After Sarah passed, the house felt impossibly empty, impossibly quiet. Except for David. He was still there, a constant brooding presence. And with Sarah gone, the last buffer between his demands and my dwindling energy was removed. I was older now, retired. My health wasn't what it used to be. Arthritis in my hands, a dodgy knee. I found myself increasingly tired, increasingly vulnerable. And David, he seemed to sense it. His disrespect grew bolder. The verbal jabs became more frequent, sharper. He'd criticize the food I cooked, complain about the way I kept the house, his mother's house, he'd often remind me, as if I had no claim to it. He'd take my pension money, sometimes asking, sometimes just taking. What could I do? Argue. He was younger, stronger. The thought of a physical confrontation terrified me. He took over the living room. His video games, his movies, his mess. It was his domain. I found myself retreating more and more to my bedroom, or to this porch swing, just to find a moment's peace. My home, the home Sarah and I had built with love and sacrifice, no longer felt like mine. It felt like I was a guest, an unwelcome one at that, in David's house. He rarely spoke to me unless he wanted something. A grunt in the morning, a demand in the afternoon. The isolation was profound. I was alone, truly alone, with this man who wore my son's face but possessed none of his heart, or so it seemed. The days leading up to that day were much like any other. Her grey monotony of quiet despair on my part, and entitled indifference on David's. I remember it was a Tuesday. I hadn't slept well the night before. My back was aching, and a dull headache throbbed behind my eyes. All I wanted was to sit in my old armchair, the one Sarah had always said was molded perfectly to my shape, and watch a bit of television. Maybe an old movie, something gentle to pass the time. I shuffled into the living room. David was sprawled on the sofa, a game controller in his hands, eyes glued to the giant television screen he'd insisted on buying with money. I'm fairly certain came from my savings account. The sound was deafening, explosions and gunfire. "David," I said, my voice barely a croak. He didn't look up. "David," I tried again, a little louder. "Could you please turn that down a bit? and I was hoping I could watch something for a while. He paused the game, his expression one of pure annoyance. "What?" "I'm in the middle of a game." "I know, son, but I'm not feeling too well. I just want to sit quietly and watch something. Maybe we could share. Or you could play in your room." I knew it was a feeble request even as I made it. He scoffed. "Play in my room? The good TV is out here. You can watch something later." "Later?" I felt a flicker of my old spirit. "David, this is my house too. I just want an hour, maybe 2. I need to rest." He stood up then, and there was something in his eyes, a coldness that made my blood run cold. He was taller than me, broader. He'd let himself go soft around the middle, but he still had a physical presence that was intimidating. "Rest," he sneered. The word dripped with contempt. "Why should you rest? What do you do all day that's so tiring, old man?" The cruelty of it stunned me. "David, that's not fair." "Fair?" He took a step closer. The remote control for the television was on the coffee table between us. I reached for it, thinking if I could just get it, I could turn off the infernal game, assert some small measure of control. His hand shot out, faster than mine, and grabbed the remote. "Oh no, you don't. David, please," I begged, my voice trembling now. "I just want to watch my program." And then he said it, the words that will echo in my memory until the day I die. "You don't deserve to rest. You don't deserve anything." His face was contorted with a rage that seemed to come from some deep, dark place I couldn't comprehend. And then he raised his hand, the one holding the remote, and he brought it down hard against the side of my head. The shock was electric, not just the physical pain, though that was sharp and immediate, a sickening thud that sent stars exploding behind my eyes. It was the other shock, the realization my son, my own flesh and blood, had struck me. I stumbled back, clutching my head. My glasses flew off, skittering across the floor. The room tilted. You hit me," I stammered, disbelief warring with the throbbing pain. He just stared at me, his chest heaving, the remote still clutched in his hand like a weapon. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise. Fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold anger. "Yeah, well, maybe you'll listen next time," he spat, then turned back to his game, unpausing it as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just assaulted his elderly father. I stood there for a long moment, swaying, the sound of virtual gunfire filling the room, mocking my pain. My ear was ringing, my cheek burned, but it was the ache in my heart that was the most unbearable. It felt as if something inside me had shattered, something precious and irreplaceable, the last vestiges of hope for my son, the lingering embers of a father's unconditional love. They seemed to crumble into ash. He didn't just hit me. He confirmed what I had long feared. He had no respect for me, no love, no empathy. In his eyes, I was nothing, less than nothing, an inconvenience, an obstacle to his desires. "You don't deserve to rest." Slowly, painfully, I bent down and fumbled for my glasses. One of the lenses was cracked, fitting, I thought, a cracked lens to view a cracked and broken world. I made my way out of the living room, each step an effort, and retreated to my bedroom, the only sanctuary I had left. I closed the door, a flimsy barrier against the ugliness that had filled my home, and sank onto the edge of my bed. My head was throbbing, a dull, persistent ache, but it was the turmoil inside me that was truly agonizing. What was I going to do? I couldn't live like this. I couldn't. The thought of facing another day, another week, another month under the same roof as him, enduring his contempt, his cruelty, the constant threat of his temper, it was unbearable. For years, I had made excuses for him. For years, I had hoped. For years, Sarah and I had enabled him in our own misguided way, and this is where it had led, to this. A son striking his father, a father cowering in his own bedroom. Shame washed over me, hot and suffocating. Shame for what David had become. Shame for my own weakness, my own inability to prevent this, to fix this. Tears welled in my eyes, old man's tears, hot and bitter. I hadn't cried like that since Sarah died. I lay there for a long time, the afternoon light fading outside my window. The house was quiet now, apart from the distant, muffled sounds of David's television. He hadn't come to check on me, hadn't shown a shred of remorse. Of course he hadn't. Why would he? I was just the old man who didn't deserve to rest. And then, as despair threatened to swallow me whole, something happened. It wasn't a booming voice from heaven or a blinding light. It was quieter than that. A thought, small at first, then growing stronger, clearer. It was the memory of Mrs. Peterson, my next-door neighbor. Emily Peterson, a widow like me, though some years younger. She was a kind woman, quiet, kept mostly to herself. We'd exchange pleasantries over the fence sometimes, comment on the weather or her prize-winning roses. She'd occasionally bring over a plate of cookies or a small casserole after Sarah passed. Small gestures, but they meant a lot. Lately, I'd noticed her looking over more often, not in a nosy way, but concerned. Sometimes, when David was particularly loud, shouting at me or slamming doors, I'd catch a glimpse of her at her window, her face etched with worry. We'd never spoken about David, not directly, but I sensed she knew, or at least suspected. Women have a way of seeing things, don't they? A kind of intuition. The thought of Mrs. Peterson was like a tiny pinprick of light in the darkness. Could I talk to her, tell her what happened? The shame of it was still immense. But the alternative, doing nothing, staying here, was even worse. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be how my story ended. He hit me. My son hit me. The phrase repeated in my mind, a horrifying litany. And with each repetition, a tiny spark of something else ignited within me. Not just fear, not just despair, but anger. A cold, hard anger. And resolve. He would not break me. He would not. I didn't have a concrete plan. My mind was still reeling. But the thought of reaching out, of breaking the silence, it was a start. It felt like a monumental effort to even consider it. David was still in the house. What if he heard me? What if he saw me? The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But the image of his face, contorted with rage as he struck me, that image was stronger. That image fueled a desperation I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just about my comfort anymore. It was about my safety, my dignity, my very survival. I had to assess the risks. David was unpredictable. If he found out I was trying to get help, his reaction could be severe. I had no real resources. My pension was barely enough to cover the bills, and David often helped himself to that. I wasn't physically strong enough to oppose him. My only weapon, if you could call it that, was my mind, and whatever courage I could scrape together, and perhaps, just perhaps, the kindness of a neighbor. The miracle, as I called it, didn't unfold all at once. It began with that tiny seed of an idea, that desperate hope centered on Mrs. Peterson. But how to reach her without David knowing? He rarely left the house for long, and when he did, he usually took the car, my car, effectively trapping me. Using the phone was risky. He could easily overhear. I waited until the next morning. My head still ached, and a purplish bruise was blooming on my cheekbone, hidden mostly by my glasses, I hoped. I went through the motions of making breakfast, a silent, tense ritual. David barely acknowledged me, just grunted when I put a plate of toast in front of him, which he then proceeded to douse in half a jar of jam. He seemed to have forgotten, or chosen to ignore, the events of the previous day. For him, it was just another Tuesday. For me, it was the day everything had to change. My chance came, unexpectedly, later that morning. David announced he was going out. "Need the car," he grunted, already jingling the keys he'd taken from the hook by the door. "Meeting some guys." He didn't say when he'd be back. He never did. I just nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. I watched from the window as he backed the car out of the driveway and sped off down the street. The moment he was out of sight, I moved. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlatch the back door. I practically stumbled out into the yard, making my way to the fence that separated my property from Mrs. Peterson's. Her kitchen window faced my backyard. I prayed she was home, that she would see me. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather my courage. What if she didn't want to get involved? What if she thought I was just a crazy old man? Then I touched my cheek, felt the tender, swollen flesh. No, I had to do this. I took a deep breath and called out, my voice thin and reedy, "Mrs. Peterson, Emily, are you there?" For a heart-stopping moment, there was no response. Then I saw movement at her window. The curtain twitched, and then her face appeared. She looked surprised to see me there, in the middle of the morning, looking, I'm sure, like something the cat dragged in. She opened her window. "David, is everything all right?" Her voice was kind, laced with that concern I'd noticed before. Tears pricked my eyes again. "No, Emily," I managed, my voice breaking. "No, it's not all right, not at all. I need help." The look on her face shifted from concern to alarm. "David, what is it? What's happened?" I couldn't bring myself to shout it across the yard. Can I come over? Just for a minute, please." "Of course, David, of course. Come around to the back door, it's open." I hurried, as fast as my old legs would carry me, around the fence and to her back door. She was waiting for me, her expression a mixture of apprehension and compassion. She ushered me into her warm, sunny kitchen. It smelled of cinnamon and something baking. It was a world away from the cold, sterile atmosphere of my own home. "David, dear, sit down, sit down." She guided me to a chair at her small kitchen table. "You look dreadful. What on earth?" And then the words just tumbled out. All of it. Not just about the remote, about him hitting me, but about the years of disrespect, the demands, the fear, the isolation. I told her about Sarah, about my guilt, my despair. I even showed her the bruise on my cheek, the cracked lens in my glasses. The shame was still there, but it was overshadowed by a desperate need to be heard, to be believed. Mrs. Peterson listened. She listened without interrupting, her kind eyes fixed on my face. She made me a cup of tea, her hands moving with a quiet efficiency. When I finally ran out of words, voice hoarse, emotions raw, she reached across the table and gently took my trembling hand in hers. "Oh, David," she said softly, her voice full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. "For that dreadful boy, I had suspected things weren't right. I've heard him, shouting, and you've seemed so diminished lately. I'm so sorry, David. So terribly sorry you've been going through this alone." Her validation, her belief, it was like a balm to my wounded soul. Just knowing that someone else saw, someone else understood, it lifted a fraction of the immense burden I'd been carrying. "What can I do, David?" she asked. "How can I help?" And that right there was the miracle. Not just her listening, but her immediate, unequivocal offer of help. I hadn't dared to hope for so much. I don't know," I stammered. I can't go back there. Not like this. I'm afraid of him, Emily." She nodded, her expression grim. "You shouldn't have to be afraid in your own home, David. No one should. This is abuse, elder abuse, and it's wrong." She said the words I hadn't dared to frame myself. Elder abuse. It sounded so clinical, so stark, but it was true. "We need to call someone, David," she said, her voice firm now, decisive. "The police, adult protective services, someone who can intervene." The thought of involving the police terrified me. David was my son. What would happen to him? But what was the alternative? More of the same? Worse? Mrs. Peterson seemed to read my thoughts. "I know it's hard, David. He's your son. But he's also a grown man who is harming you. You need to be safe." She was right. My safety, my dignity, they mattered. "There's a senior helpline," she continued, already moving towards her telephone. "And I think Adult Protective Services is the right place to start. They can advise us. Maybe they can come and talk to David, or help you find a safer place to be, at least temporarily." This was happening so fast. Just an hour ago, I was trapped in my own personal hell. Now here was this kind woman, this angel in a floral apron taking charge, offering a lifeline. It felt unreal. She made the call. I sat there, listening to her explain the situation in calm, clear terms. She didn't exaggerate, didn't embellish. She just stated the facts. My name, my age, David's behavior, the incident with the remote. She emphasized that I was afraid for my safety. When she hung up, she looked at me. They're taking it very seriously, David. They want to send someone out to talk to you, as soon as possible. They asked if you're safe right now, if David is there. He's out, I said, but he could be back any time. All right, she said. They can arrange to meet you here at my house, if that's better. Or they can come to your house with a police escort if necessary, especially if he's there and likely to be aggressive. A police escort. The words sent a shiver down my spine, but Mrs. Peterson was resolute. David, you need to be protected. If he comes back while they're here, and he gets aggressive, it might be the very thing that shows them how serious this is. We decided it would be best if they came to my house. It was my home, after all. And perhaps, as Mrs. Peterson said, David's reaction would speak louder than any words I could offer. She said she would come with me, stay with me. I wouldn't have to face them, or David alone. The waiting was agonizing. Every car that passed on the street made my heart leap into my throat. Was it David? What would he do if he found me with Mrs. Peterson, clearly having sought help? The fear was a living thing, coiling in my stomach. Mrs. Peterson kept talking to me, quietly, calmly, reassuring me that I was doing the right thing, that I was brave. Brave. I felt anything but brave. I felt like a terrified old man, cornered and desperate. It was about an hour later when a car pulled up outside my house. It wasn't David's car. It was an official-looking vehicle. A woman and a man got out. They looked professional, calm. Mrs. Peterson took my arm. Come on, David. It's time. We walked back across the yard, through my back door, and into my kitchen. It felt strange, re-entering my own home under these circumstances, with these strangers who were here because my life had fallen apart. The woman introduced herself as Ms. Evans, from Adult Protective Services, and the man was Officer Miller. They were both gentle, respectful. Ms. Evans did most of the talking. She asked me to recount what had happened, what my life with David had been like. It was harder this time, with official ears listening. The shame was acute, but Mrs. Peterson was there, a quiet, supportive presence by my side, and that made all the difference. I told them everything, my voice faltering at times, especially when I described being hit. Officer Miller made notes, his expression unreadable but not unkind. Ms. Evans listened with an empathetic ear, nodding, asking clarifying questions. Mr. Anderson, Miss Evans said when I had finished, what you've described is a very serious situation. No one has the right to treat you this way, especially not in your own home. You deserve to be safe and you deserve to be treated with respect. Her words, so simple, so direct, were incredibly powerful. They affirmed my worth, a worth that David had systematically tried to strip away. Just as she was explaining the options available, a restraining order, help with finding alternative accommodation for me or for David, ongoing support, we heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My car, David, was back. My blood ran cold. Officer Miller and Ms. Evans exchanged a look. It's all right, Mr. Anderson, Officer Miller said, his voice calm but authoritative. We're here. Let us handle this. The back door opened and David walked in. He stopped short when he saw us. His eyes, bleary from whatever he'd been doing, widened first in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion as he took in the scene. Me, looking shaken, Mrs. Peterson by my side, and two strangers, one in a police uniform. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, his voice instantly aggressive. He looked at me. What did you do, old man? David, I began, my voice trembling. But Officer Miller stepped forward. Sir, my name is Officer Miller, and this is Miss Evans from Adult Protective Services. We're here to speak with Mr. Anderson. David's eyes darted between them and me, his face flushing with anger. Speak about what? What lies has he been telling you? He's just a senile old fool. The insult, so casual, so cruel, still stung, but this time I wasn't alone. Sir, we'd appreciate it if you'd remain calm, Officer Miller said, his tone firm. Calm? David scoffed, taking a step further into the kitchen. He was trying to intimidate, to dominate the space, as he always did. "You come into my house with him?" He gestured contemptuously at me. "And you tell me to be calm." "Actually, sir," Ms. Evans interjected smoothly, "this is Mr. Anderson's house. And we're here because there have been reports of abuse." David's jaw dropped. Then he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Abuse? Are you kidding me? He's the one making my life hell. I'm the victim here." It was so outrageous, so far from the truth, that for a moment I was speechless. "David," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice surprisingly strong, "I saw what you did yesterday. I heard you. There's no point in denying it." David whirled on her. "How stay out of this, you nosy old biddy?" Officer Miller took a step towards David. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once more to calm down and lower your voice. Your behavior right now is not helping your case." David wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his rage, by the fact that his control was being challenged. He pointed a finger at me. "This is your fault. You went crying to the neighbors, to the cops. After everything I do for you. Everything you do for me." I finally found my voice, laced with a bitterness that surprised even myself. "You mean take my money, eat my food, treat me like dirt, and then hit me when I dare to ask for a moment's peace?" The words hung in the air. David's face contorted. For a second I thought he was going to lunge at me. Officer Miller clearly thought so too, because he moved swiftly, positioning himself between me and David. "That's enough, sir," Officer Miller said, his voice now carrying a clear warning. "Your father has made a serious allegation against you. We need to investigate. And your current behavior is extremely concerning." David seemed to realize, perhaps too late, that his usual tactics of bluster and aggression weren't working. He looked from Officer Miller's stern face to Ms. Evans's watchful one, then back to me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred that chilled me to the bone. "You'll regret this, old man," he hissed. "You'll all regret this." "Is that a threat, sir?" Officer Miller asked quietly. David didn't answer. He just glared, then turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the back door so hard that a plate rattled on the counter. We heard him stomping through the house, then another door slam, presumably his bedroom. The silence he left behind was thick with tension. Miss B. Evans let out a slow breath. "Well," she said, "that was illuminating." Officer Miller nodded. "Mr. Anderson, based on what you've told us and what we've just witnessed, I believe we have grounds to issue an emergency protective order. It would mean your son would have to leave the premises immediately and stay away from you for a period of time, giving you some breathing room and us time to work on a more permanent solution. Leave. David would have to leave." The thought was both terrifying and incredibly liberating. What would happen to him?" I asked, the father in me still stupidly worrying. "He'll have to find somewhere else to stay," Ms. Evans said gently but firmly. "Friends, other family, if he has any." "That's not your concern right now, David. Your concern needs to be your own safety and well-being." They explained the process. Officer Miller would serve the order on David. He'd have to pack a few essential belongings and leave. If he refused, he could be arrested. It all felt like a whirlwind. But through it all, Mrs. Peterson stayed by my side, her quiet strength a constant reassurance. Officer Miller went to find David. We could hear raised voices from the other room, David's mostly loud and abusive. Then, silence. After what felt like an eternity, Officer Miller returned. "He's not happy," he said, an understatement if I ever heard one. "But he understands the order. He's packing a bag. He has to be out within the hour." And just like that, it was happening. The end of a nightmare I'd been living for years. The next hour was one of the longest of my life. David stalked through the house, throwing things into a duffel bag, muttering curses under his breath. He shot venomous looks at me whenever he passed. Ms. Evans and Officer Miller stayed, ensuring there were no more incidents. Mrs. Peterson made more tea, her presence a calm anchor in the storm. Finally, bag in hand, David stood at the back door. He looked at me one last time, his eyes cold and full of malice. "How you've made a big mistake," he said. Then he was gone. The sound of the door closing behind him was like a physical release. I sagged against the kitchen counter, suddenly overwhelmed. It was over. He was gone. Ms. Evans put a comforting hand on my arm. "Are you all right, David?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face now. Not tears of sadness or shame, but tears of relief. Pure, unadulterated relief. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I think I will be." The immediate aftermath was strange. The house was quiet. So incredibly quiet. For years, David's presence had dominated it, his moods dictating the atmosphere. Now there was just space, stillness. It was unsettling at first, like the eerie calm after a violent storm. I kept expecting to hear his heavy footsteps, his blaring television, his angry voice. But there was nothing. Miss Evans and Officer Miller stayed for a while longer, making sure I was okay, explaining the next steps. The protective order was temporary, but they would help me apply for a more permanent one. They gave me numbers to call, resources for support. They were kind, professional, and for the first time in a very long time I felt like I wasn't alone, like there were people who genuinely cared about my well-being. Mrs. Peterson, bless her heart, insisted on staying with me that first night. "You shouldn't be alone, David," she said. "Not tonight." I didn't argue. The thought of facing that empty house, even without David's threatening presence, was daunting. She helped me change the locks on the doors, a practical step that felt hugely symbolic. We ate a simple supper together in her kitchen, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I actually tasted my food. The journey to my new life, or rather, the reclaiming of my old one, was not instantaneous. It was a slow, gradual process. The first few days were filled with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected noise would make me jump, thinking David had somehow come back. But he didn't. The protective order seemed to be working. There were challenges, of course. The house felt too big, too empty. Decades of David's accumulated junk had to be dealt with. Old clothes, broken electronics, stacks of magazines and video games. It was like an archaeological dig through years of neglect and apathy. Mrs. Peterson helped me, bless her. We'd tackle a room at a time, bagging things up, cleaning. It was physically exhausting but also strangely therapeutic. With each bag of rubbish I threw out, it felt like I was also throwing out a piece of the darkness that had clung to my home for so long. Healing wasn't just about cleaning the house, though. It was about cleaning out the wounds inside me. The nightmares were frequent at first. Vivid, terrifying replays of David's anger, of being hit. The shame still lingered, the feeling that I had somehow failed as a father. I talked to a counselor Mrs. Evans recommended, a kind woman named Dr. Ramirez. She helped me understand that David's choices were his own, that I wasn't responsible for the man he had become. She helped me process the grief. Grief for the son I thought I had. Grief for the years lost to fear and unhappiness. It was hard work, painful work. But slowly, gradually, the weight on my chest began to lighten. I started to reconnect with the world. Little things, at first. I'd sit on my porch swing, actually enjoying the sunshine instead of hiding from it. I started tending to Sarah's rose bushes again, something I'd neglected for years. Mrs. Peterson and I developed a comfortable routine. We'd have coffee together in the mornings, sometimes share a meal. Her friendship was an unexpected gift, a beacon of kindness in the wake of so much ugliness. She never pried, never judged. She just understood. I reconnected with my sister, Clara. I called her, told her everything. She was horrified, of course, and full of regret that she hadn't known, hadn't been there for me. She came to visit, and it was good to see her, to feel that familial bond again, however frayed it had become over the years. Life settled into a new rhythm, a peaceful rhythm. I rediscovered old hobbies. I started reading again, devouring books from the local library. I even joined a seniors walking group that met in the park twice a week. It felt good to be active, to be around people who were cheerful and kind. I made new friends, people who knew me as David, the quiet, friendly widower, not David, the father of a monstrous son. What happened to David? Well, The permanent restraining order was granted. He wasn't allowed near me or my property. From what I heard through the grapevine, he drifted for a while, staying with various so-called friends, none of whom seemed to want him around for long. Last I heard, he was living in a rundown apartment on the other side of town, still unemployed, still, I imagine, blaming everyone but himself for his problems. Do I feel pity for him? Sometimes, a flicker of it. He's still my son, after all, however twisted and broken he's become. But mostly I feel a profound sadness for the waste of a life, for the potential he threw away, and I know, with a certainty that chills me, that I can never allow him back into my life, for my own sake, for my own survival. The years have passed since that terrible day. I'm older now, frailer perhaps, but in many ways, I feel stronger than I have in decades. I've learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to fight for your dignity. I've learned that kindness can be found in the most unexpected places, like in the concern of a quiet neighbor. I've learned that true strength isn't about physical power, but about the courage to speak your truth, even when it's terrifying. My home is mine again. It's filled with Sarah's memory, yes, but not with the oppressive shadow of David's anger. It's filled with the scent of Mrs. Peterson's baking drifting over the fence, with the laughter of Clara's grandchildren when they visit, with the quiet rustle of book pages turning. It's peaceful. Sometimes, young people, when they look at someone like me, an old man, they see someone who's finished, whose story is over. But they're wrong. My story wasn't over that day. David hit me. In a strange way, it was a new beginning. A painful one, yes, but a necessary one. I had to lose a son in a way to find myself again. And the miracle? It wasn't just Mrs. Peterson's intervention, as vital as that was. The miracle was also the spark of fight that remained in me, the refusal to be completely extinguished. It was the courage to reach out, the strength to accept help, and the resilience to rebuild. I look at my hands now, these old, gnarled hands. They've seen a lot of life and a lot of work, a lot of sorrow, but they're not shaking anymore. Not with fear, anyway. Maybe a little with age, but that's different. That's natural. What David did was unnatural. It was a violation of everything a family should be. So here I am, on my porch swing, the sun setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It's beautiful, and I'm here to appreciate it. I deserve to rest. I deserve peace. We all do. If you're listening to this, and if my story resonates with you in any way, if you're facing your own darkness, please know this. You are not alone. There is help out there. There is hope. Don't let anyone, no matter who they are, steal your light, steal your peace. It took me too long to learn that lesson, but I learned it, and I'm grateful. Grateful for this second chance, grateful for the kindness of strangers who became friends, grateful for the quiet strength I found within myself when I needed it most. Thank you for listening to an old man ramble. It means more than you know. Sharing this, it's like letting out a long-held breath. It's heavy, yes, but it's also freeing. I hope my story, as painful as it is in parts, might offer a glimmer of hope to someone else. Remember to be kind to yourselves and to each other, and if you feel so inclined, please do press that little like button or subscribe. It helps these stories find their way. Today, I'm David Anderson. I'm a survivor, and I'm finally at peace in my own home. And that, my friends, is a miracle in itself. Thank you. Thank you for being here with me. Until next time, may your days be filled with more light than shadow. Goodbye for now.